Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest business survival webinar, Preparing Your Business for Future Restrictions. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give folks a few moments to come through the system, because obviously, as you will experience, you have to register to get into the service. So we'll give folks a few moments to be able to join us. And while we're doing that, what I'd like to do is obviously introduce our panel this morning, or in fact get them to introduce themselves. So a brief word from each of you, please, on who you are and your organisation, and can I start with Susan?
Morning everybody, my name's Susan Love. I work for the FSB, the Federation of Small Businesses, which is a membership body representing the interests of small businesses across Scotland and the self-employed.
Thanks, Susan. And Brian.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian Lawrie. I'm an Environmental Health Officer, and I'm representing the Society of Chief Officers of Environmental Health, but also representing the wider local authority regulators that are involved in the COVID response.
Okay, thank you. And Linda.
Hi folks, my name is Linda McAllister. I'm the Senior Manager for Business Advice and Quality at VisitScotland. So I look after a team of industry relationship managers and quality and tourism advisors who are there to help businesses to recover and to grow throughout the course of this pandemic.
Thanks, Linda. And I'm Hugh, I'm Chief Officer for the Business Gateway National Unit in COSLA. So as I say, welcome again to our webinar. The webinar is being recorded, must let you know that, and obviously it will be then made available afterwards so that folks that can't make it along can actually get to see it later. Everyone has been placed on mute to basically reduce background noise. We have asked people in advance to submit questions. We've had quite a number of those. We will try and get to them as best we can, but what I will say to you is that those we don't get to, we will follow up through social media, the website and so on, with answers and links to important information that will help you with those. You can continue to send questions to business@bgateway.com, and while we, as I say, might not have the time to cover them, we will follow up those with any kind of pertinent information that needs to be given. And a wee note, just obviously we'll be tweeting as well, so you might see some things going on social media on it. So, without further ado, why are we here? Why are we talking about this? Well, obviously, a few weeks ago, we went into another lockdown situation, particularly in the central belt of Scotland. So more restrictions were brought in for businesses. And just last week, additional restrictions are being brought in, a new approach, a tiered approach, which the government will be discussing and laying before Parliament this afternoon. So, lots of things going on that are, what we're trying to do, we're trying to reduce the R rate, because clearly it's creeping up and that's concerning people, given the situation we've been in over the last few months. Susan, can you maybe kind of kick us off just very, very briefly, because we can get into kind of more detail as we go forward. What can businesses expect going forward? And just briefly, how can they prepare for the new approach to lockdown?
So we had found ourselves in a situation where the Scottish Government had this route map document that we'd sort of used as we started to come out of lockdown over the summer. And that set out the different types of business activity that were going to be allowed when we passed certain stages in the route map. But of course, perhaps what we didn't bank on was the second wave of the virus picking up to the extent that it did. And so we've become stalled in phase 3 of the route map, with additional restrictions therein being added on in recent weeks, really since the sort of initial outbreak in Aberdeen. Since then, there have been a period of additional restrictions on and off. So, as you said, there's a new draft strategic framework being published by the Scottish Government, which will be approved hopefully very soon, and that will come into effect from next week. Now, the aim of this is that it will help give businesses and others some degree of certainty around what restrictions will look like. And we can come into the detail of that, I'm sure, a little bit later. But what's clear is we're not going to be going back to business as normal anytime soon, at least for the next few months. We might have a clearer idea of what business restrictions will be, but it's clear that we will still face the prospect of stop-start across some sectors. So how can businesses prepare for that? Well, obviously, once this plan is finalised, it'll be the job of the government and others like ourselves to try and communicate what this means for different business sectors. You might want to, if you haven't already, think about the plans you would need to put in place for your business if you needed to close with a few days' notice, or indeed if you need to reopen. And it's generally a good idea to have a business continuity plan in place, of course, and there's organisations that can help with that, including the FSB. Now, as part of this new strategic framework, some businesses might be asked to undertake additional protective measures in addition to what they're already doing under the guidance. So that means it's likely that businesses will want to probably revisit their risk assessment. You might want to talk to your staff about what's happening next and what the changes are. And there's a bit more detail now about the financial support that's available from different sources to give businesses a bit more certainty to plan what they want to do for the next few months.
Okay, thanks for that, Susan. Brian, just picking up Susan's point there about the kind of risk assessment side of things, and given your experiences from the environmental health side of this, any particular thoughts or insights you would have on that kind of risk assessment side of things?
Well, for me, I think risk assessment in some areas of COVID is actually very difficult because the science isn't there and the guidance isn't there to actually allow us to do the full risk assessment. I think what we should be talking about is the reasonable measures that businesses can put into place to actually reduce that risk of transmission, whether that's person to person through aerosol or through contact with contaminated surfaces. So yeah, as we go forward, we'll learn more about it. We'll be able to provide more guidance that will enable that wider risk assessment to happen. But at the moment, for some areas, it is just not there. So just think about the reasonable measures, look at the guidance because it's there for a reason.
Super, thanks for that, Brian. And Linda, obviously, as we've seen, the hospitality sector in particular has been impacted again by this most recent lockdown. Clearly, that has a knock-on impact for supply chains and for other businesses, or indeed for businesses that rely on hospitality as part of their business model. And I'm thinking there of, accommodation providers and so on. So, particularly from the kind of hospitality kind of side of things, what's your kind of perspective on what businesses need to do to prepare for this?
Well, you're right, it's been devastating for the sector and for the industry overall. I mean, they were looking forward to a really strong trade in summer, and then to have the summer season taken away from them, spending a huge amount of time over that period getting COVID ready, getting ready to reopen, getting ready to welcome visitors again. To capture the end of the summer season and then potentially into the last, large kind of blast of the season, which would have been the October holidays, and then to have those additional restrictions placed on them in the October holidays was really, really challenging. So we totally understand it's a terribly distressing time for the sector, and really what they have to think about now is really kind of highlighting those measures in particular that they're taking to be COVID ready, to be as clean as they possibly can, and ensuring that they're not only doing it but being seen to do it. Consumers, and particularly the post-COVID consumer, will absolutely need that reassurance. We'll need to see physical evidence of that cleanliness in place and that work that's been undertaken to make sure that they're going to have a positive visitor experience. Aside from the work that you'll be doing in the background kind of structurally to make sure that you're able to maintain your physical distancing within your premises, being seen to have those cleanliness markers are going to be a very, very strong reassurance element for the consumer.
Okay, well, that's really helpful. Thanks, Linda. So, I mean, kind of thinking about all those kind of aspects we've talked about there, what do you as the panel feel the next few months are going to look like for businesses? Kind of more of the same that we've been through? Is it going to be more difficult? Is it going to be more challenging? What's your kind of thoughts? Brian, can I come to you first?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on what area you actually reside in or your business trades in. Obviously, as you've said, Hugh, we've got increased transmission and incidence in the community now, and with that increased incidence, then we get an increased risk, especially in some of our environments like hospitality, where people are spending more time in. The longer they're in that area, the more opportunity there is to contaminate it and also to pick it up. So I think if you're in one of the areas where you're going to see a bit of easement of the restrictions and normality, if we can say normality, there's an opportunity obviously to make sure that your business is as safe as possible and maintain that safety so that your community doesn't escalate in the tiers. And those that are in the kind of protected areas, I think we'll discuss later the kind of nitty-gritty of it, but I think, you know, it's going to be a real challenge, and we need everyone, you know, with the government talking about Team Scotland, and I think that it's us as regulators, it's you guys as businesses, and it's our customers, our public as well, really grasping hold of the fact that we all have to behave properly to get the levels back down and return back to normality.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Susan, I mean, from your perspective, can you take us through what you feel the wider policy and business issues are that are facing businesses?
Okay, thanks, Hugh. I mean, I think the overriding feeling that we get back from most businesses at the moment is just the utter exhaustion at the ongoing uncertainty. Yeah. That's the sort of dominant feeling, is that we thought we understood how to deal with this, having come through the sort of initial lockdown crisis of the spring, and yet we still find ourselves very far away from being back to normal trading. And even as businesses are doing what is asked of them, there are more restrictions being placed on them. And so when I speak to a lot of business owners, they're just exhausted. There's nothing left in the tank. And they're now coming up to a point where they're having to make quite difficult decisions about how their business is going to get through the next few months. I also think it's fair just to highlight that although I'm generalising there, the impact of this on different types of business, it is uneven. So some businesses have, you know, notwithstanding what we mean by normal within this crisis in terms of the different way that we all live and work, but some businesses have been able to carry on trading or to resume trading. But for many others, and not just hospitality, but for many other types of small business, the entire market has been wiped out. So we're thinking about the events related businesses and the huge supply chain around that, the travel sector, fitness and sport businesses, firms based in the city centres, for example, where there's no footfall and there isn't likely to be for a while. So for a huge range of businesses, you know, they're still dealing with serious impacts on their trading, and we have no clear sign yet of when that's going to resume. So what I can do is just take a couple of minutes just to go through what this next step is going to look like in terms of what this new levelled approach looks like for restrictions on business activity in Scotland. So I'll try and go through it, and bear in mind this comes into effect from next week. That's the plan. So there's 5 tiers, as you may have heard, from 0 through to 4. Most of us, whether we're in the Central Belt or out with, are currently around tiers 2 and 3. 0 is kind of back to where we were hoping to get. We were nearly there in the summer, so 0 is sort of best case scenario. And 4 is much more severe lockdown. But in the main, I think we might anticipate at the moment that most areas are going to be within sort of 1 to 3, certainly in the short term. Also important to note that this new plan is based on local authority areas. So the current restrictions are on health board areas. We're going to move to slightly smaller local authority based changes. And so that is how you will know what level affects your business, by thinking about what local authority area you're in. So quite a lot of what's in the framework will more or less carry on the restrictions you've already got if you're in level 2 or 3 at the moment. But there are potentially some changes that businesses would want to look out for. So whether that's in terms of specific business activity and changes there, or it could be around some of the travel restrictions that are potentially proposed, as well as things like advice for some of your staff, because there's new shielding advice coming out for people who are shielding. So I'll go through some of these. Obviously, I can't go through all of it, and you can find all of this in a sort of fairly easy read table at the back of the draft document that you can find on the government website. So one of the issues that's received most publicity is hospitality, because clearly that's a large sector that's been subject to a lot of changes. And what's proposed in this document is a sort of a new matrix that would apply to hospitality. So it's slightly different from what we currently have. And this may change. Bear in mind this is a draft, so this may well change over the next few days. There might be some clarification, but there's three sort of main factors that determine the restrictions for hospitality. Those are selling food for consumption on the premises, selling alcohol indoors, and selling alcohol outdoors. So when you look across this new matrix, you could see, for example, the rules changing next week so that currently all hospitality, with the exception of cafes, is closed in the central belt. You could potentially see those just selling food allowed to reopen under level 3, but no alcohol would be allowed to be sold. Similarly, for those premises that are out with the central belt and who can only sell alcohol outside at the moment, they might be able to serve it inside, but only with a main meal. All of this is still subject to time restrictions. So the sort of closure times that we have at the moment, this is all subject to that continuing. The current 6.2 rules for household mixing continues, with the exception that if we get to level 0, it relaxes to an 8.3 rule. But when you have a look at this, you can see that there's still a lot of detail to be ironed out here. Yeah. So it's being worked on just now, but main meal is likely to become next week's cafe definition, sushi, as we work out what serving alcohol with a main meal means. But ideally, we will get all of this nailed down as soon as possible so that businesses can start to prepare for which level they're going to find themselves in and what that means for them. So that's hospitality. Just a couple of others I'll briefly mention. Across all of these levels, working from home remains the default position. There is some suggestion that non-essential offices might be able to open under level 0, but working from home will still be advised. Some changes around indoor entertainment under levels 0 and 1, including soft play, incidentally, which has been closed throughout, but similar restrictions around things like bingo halls and bowling alleys once you get into levels 2. Similar around gyms and fitness businesses. Close contact businesses, that's all our hairdressers, barbers, beauty businesses, tailors, etc. Now, throughout this, it's saying that mobile operators would still have to remain closed. And at level 3, which is roughly equivalent to where the central belt is at the moment, these businesses at the moment existing hairdressers and close contact businesses might be asked to undertake additional protective measures. So we're trying to get clarity on what that means. So you go through it. There's a lot of information in there that I would advise businesses to have a quick look across. We're trying to get as much clarity as we can on all of these details, because we know from the previous announcements that not having this detail pinned down is what can cause a lot of unnecessary confusion and upset to businesses.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Susan. Linda, just thinking about everything that Susan's kind of detailed there, and as Susan said quite rightly, the framework's available on the government website, so folk can really immerse themselves and recommend that you do have a look at that. What do you think is important if businesses are going to survive the coming months in the face of a lot of rules, a lot of guidelines, and quite complex and quite hard to kind of nail down, as we're hearing? There's still, I think the word that Susan used was a stushy over meals and what's a cafe and so on. What do you think businesses, what's important to them to survive?
I think clarity, first and foremost. Clarity not only on, as Susan says, the operational guidance for businesses and being very sector specific in that operational guidance. That's something that we worked quite closely with government on during the the last close down, the national close down. We worked really hard to get guidance down to a very, very specific sectoral level. So this is how it applies to tour operators, and this is how it applies to visit attractions, for example. Funding, clarity of funding is going to continue to be really important, whether you are directly impacted by things like closure orders or you're indirectly impacted. And then funding, that clarity and funding extends, of course, to your the operational nature of your business, whether you are within a premises that attracts as a ratepayer, or if you're paying non-domestic rates, for example, if you're a B&B and you pay council tax. So the more that we can gather those kind of instances of where that clarity is required and that clarity is needed, and feed it back through government, predominantly through STERG, the Scottish Tourism Emergency Response Group, then that allows us to kind of push for that clarity with government and get that certainty for businesses. In the longer term, there is a lot that businesses can do, certainly, to maintain their brand, to keep in touch with consumers, even if they find that they have to close. We've seen a lot of innovation in the sector. We've seen restaurants delivering a really fantastic value, high-end takeaway, gourmet at home product. We've seen a lot of innovation in the digital space, where businesses who have prepared for reopening and particularly engaged in the digital solutions, so that they can help to manage pre-booking. Extremely important that online booking is part of your thought process, and also from a perspective of managing your visitor capacity and looking at how many people are coming through the door and whether or not you have the space within the guidance to manage those numbers. So and as I mentioned earlier, a lot of it also comes down to understanding the post-COVID consumer and really knowing what kind of products and experiences that consumer is going to expect, and pivoting towards the markets that we know are going to be first to return. In this case, as we saw from the reopening after lockdown earlier this year, it's your local market first and foremost, and then the broader Scottish domestic market, and then the UK market.
Okay, smashing. Thanks, Linda. Brian worried me slightly there because he suddenly disappeared from the screen. I thought he'd give it up and exit stage left. Brian, you and all of our colleagues in local government involved in environmental health and so on have been working really hard with businesses as they adapt to the challenges that all of this has posed. And they're going to have to adapt to the challenges that are going to be posed by colder winter months as we go forward. Can you take us through some of the key considerations for businesses at this time, and what you feel businesses need to do to adapt?
Yeah, I've got answers to some of those questions, but not all. Yeah. And what I say today probably won't be true in about 3 hours' time, but I'll do my best.
It's a changing situation.
Yeah, exactly. What I would say is the vast majority of businesses have really responded well. You know, they've really put their heart and soul into making sure that their businesses, when they were allowed to open, did so safely. Obviously, I think just picking up on Linda's point, you know, the clarity wasn't always there. We had regulations saying one thing and the guidance saying another. That's if you could find the guidance. So one of the things we've been saying to Scottish Government, along with the colleagues that are on the call, is let's make it as clear and as simple as possible, you know, because that helps us. We don't want to spend our time explaining what you have to do to you. We want you to be able to find what you have to do and then just be able to adapt it. So the first thing I would say is I think there's been a wee bit of a misunderstanding on risk. Okay, so risk for COVID. This is about the hazard multiplied by the exposure gives you the risk. So, and I don't want to use all these technical terms to put people off, but I think you really need to understand this. The hazard is this person-to-person aerosol spread, or being in contact with a contaminated surface. Exposure, if I explain how Test and Protect see exposure and what the kind of key triggers are to mean that you're a close contact, I think that's probably the best way to go about it. So at 2 meters, they're talking about, it's a time and space thing. So if you're 2 meters from someone and they're a case and you're in that space for more than 15 minutes, then you're a close contact. Because although we have these these physical distances, they don't actually guarantee total safety. It's almost best as we can give guidance on, rather than this is a guarantee you're 100% safe. So just bear that in mind. So 2 meters, if you're in that space for more than 15 minutes, you're a close contact and you increase the risk of transmission. 2 meters to 1 meter, you're talking about 5 minutes. 1 meter and below, any time at all. So you can see that the businesses that are on the call that are in that close contact sector, you know, your chances of being a close contact escalate right through the roof. Just because to cut hair or whatever, you have to come within that 1 meter. And that's why what we say is you have to provide other mitigations to reduce that risk, such as face coverings, both for the customer and for yourself. So remember that for transmission routes, the longer time that you spend in an environment with others increases the probability of receiving that kind of dose that might lead to an infection. What is also true is that if you're in your infectious stage, which can be without any symptoms, so you don't know, if you're in an environment for a long period of time, the longer you're there, the longer you're contaminated or potentially contaminated. And that's why, you know, as we go forward with the higher community rates, Scottish Government have had to take the hard decisions of which businesses to close to reduce the amount of opportunity for us to come together. Because with higher transmission rates, it's more likely you're going to be in an environment with someone in the infectious phase, and therefore more likely that you're going to contract it yourself. And we see that with the R value, as Hugh was saying earlier, is through the roof. So one thing I would say, we don't actually have any handle on how you assess the risk of actually of infection in any given situation. So there's a bit of work going on in the background with the government advisors of the UK. There's a group called SAGE, the acronym, and they're doing work on that to come up with some kind of matrix that kind of gives an idea of what workplace settings expose risk to the customers in the workplace. Getting back to the question, Hugh, about winter and what difference it makes. Well, obviously, the ventilation, we can all see, even in the summer, sometimes you had to close windows and doors because the thermal comfort of your customers actually is compromised. So in the winter, we know that people are going to have to close windows and doors, and that the ventilation is going to become poorer. We do know that in high density environments, poor ventilation will lead to an increase in transmission. So there's a lot of work going on at the moment, predominantly in schools, but it's lessons that we can learn for every other business on how we mitigate that poorer ventilation, or the possibility of poorer ventilation. We've come across situations where there's been spread within a business and they've had ventilation systems, but they've switched it off because they heard that you shouldn't have your air conditioning system on. And that's not quite true. We're trying to prevent the recirculation of air, because that's dirty air just going round and round and round. What we want is fresh air coming in and going back out, and more fresh air coming in. So if your systems can be adapted for that, then use them that way. Don't just switch them off. I would refer anyone to the HSE website, the Health and Safety Executive website. They have a lot of information, really practical stuff on how you can improve your ventilation. And I would assure you all that in the coming weeks, we're going to see the science develop and further guidance come out on ventilation. And as soon as that's available, we will be sharing it widely and making sure that they're signposting there for everyone to see. Obviously, we're out in the street as well. We've got feet in the doors, and we'll provide that information at that time as well. The other thing I would say to you is, think about the customer journey. It's not like the summer when people are turning up in t-shirts and shorts and flip-flops and going and sitting in your beer garden. They're coming all wrapped up now. And you have to make sure that before they arrive at your front door, that they know what to expect, and what the expectations you have of them when they come to your door. So the things I would say you have to start thinking about, you probably already have, you know, with some of the weather we've had at the moment, you know, those retail places where we've gone back to 2 metres and there's a likelihood that queuing's starting again. You know, if it's a torrential downpour, how are you going to help your customer maintain their physical distancing in the queues? Is there a way that you can ask them to return to their cars and wait 5 minutes before coming in? You know, the same for people who have a business that relies on bookings, you know, making sure that people don't arrive early, etc. And the other thing is making sure that they tell you early enough. If you're relying on a booking system, cancellations affect your business substantially. So a way that it's people don't feel like they're going to get penalised, that they'll give you plenty of notice that they're going to cancel and not turn up for appointments. Once they're in your business, obviously they're wearing more clothes and they want to take those clothes off to sit down and have a comfortable time in your premises. So how do you deal with the customers' outerwear in a safe way, especially for your staff, because they're going to be handling that perhaps. You just have to think about the process. I think also making sure the physical distancing is maintained. In some businesses it's 2 metres, some businesses it's 1 metre. And I think what I've seen over the piece when I've been out and about is customers are definitely challenging for all businesses. You can set up your business perfectly, and as soon as a customer comes in, it all goes awry. You know, they frustrate your attempts to make sure that physical distancing is happening. So I would suggest, you know, that you maybe think about having a nominated person within your business that challenges the customers, obviously in a very diplomatic way, in a way that that's not going to invoke a negative reaction. But I think we have to do more to make sure that those people inside our businesses, using our businesses, are challenged, because the more people that don't follow the rules in your business, the more that the rest of them coming in will say, well, he's not following it, so why should I? You know, and that just leads to a total breakdown. We've got the face coverings. It's a really contentious issue, and I'll maybe talk about that later, you know, how it applies to employees behind the scenes. The other thing about the physical distancing is I know a lot of businesses have tried to maintain as normal environment as possible, especially in the hospitality trade. You want people walking in the door and saying, this is the place I remember, I feel comfortable in here because it hasn't changed. I think we're getting to the situation where that isn't possible anymore. We really have to make sure that the physical distancing is in place. So the likes of screens, etc., between tables may have to become the norm at the moment. But I think you should, you know, as a business, just think about that. And enhanced cleaning, as Linda said, enhanced cleaning is really important. So I would check your cleaning products. There's a lot of cleaning products out there that have a contact time of 5 minutes. I see tables, etc., getting wiped down and immediately, you know, the chemical goes on, immediately it's cleaned off, and that isn't a long enough contact time for many of the chemicals that you guys are using. So just check on that as well. Okay,
thank you very much, Brian. I think what we'll do is move on to the support that's available for businesses now, and kind of tackle that. Susan, can I come to you, that with the devolved nature of lockdown restrictions, we've talked about it going to local authority level, it's a lot for businesses to keep up with. I mean, you've talked there about a whole raft of different things, there are different tiers and so on. So it is a lot for business to keep up with. Can you provide any detail about resources available for Scottish businesses?
Okay, so the first thing to say is there's quite a lot of complex information here to convey. So you can find all of this on the findbusinesssupport.gov.scot website. So all of this information is there, and I would encourage everybody who's interested to go and have a look for it there. So first of all, I can talk about the grant schemes that are live at the moment. Obviously, there's been a whole range of schemes that have operated earlier in the year, but at the moment, we have a live grant scheme, which is a two-tier system. and that was brought in to address these new restrictions that were brought in early October. So the current two-tier system is, first of all, grants that are available for businesses that have been required to close as a result of these new restrictions. So that's primarily hospitality, a little bit of some sort of fitness businesses, but it's primarily hospitality. It does not apply to businesses that have always been closed. So we can talk about businesses excluded further on perhaps, but at the moment this is specifically for these types of businesses. So these are similar to the grants that happened in the spring. They're administered by your local authority, so go to your local authority website to apply and you'll find the information there. The closure grant is based on your rateable value. So the sort of cut-off point is rateable value up to 51,000 and then 51,000 over, so slightly different levels. It's just under 3,000 underneath the 51k, and it's just over 4.5 for those above that level. So that's you apply if your business is closed, and that is only open until the start of next week. So if your business is closed, particularly if you're in the Central Belt in one of those categories, get your application in as soon as possible. There's also a hardship element to this current grant scheme, and that hardship element again has two bits to it. So the first part is for businesses which are open but have been severely restricted as a result of the new rules. So that would perhaps cover things like hospitality businesses which are open but have much reduced opening hours. So there's a grant for those businesses, and the other part of that hardship is for businesses which have been directly affected as a result of the closure of some businesses. And priority is being given to those, to be eligible for those who are in the direct supply chain, mainly those who provide perishable goods to the businesses that have closed. Now we know that there's a huge supply chain for whom there's knock-on impacts of the businesses that have had to close. But at the moment, eligibility is for those who are directly impacted, mainly those with perishable goods. So you can find out more on the websites, as I say, about the details of these. And for this new system coming into effect from next week, it's proposed that a similar approach for grants is going to be adopted throughout this period. So depending on what level you're in, whether your business closed, there would be a sort of a similar approach to a grant that was paid on a sort of 4-weekly basis if your business was closed, and a sort of separate approach if your business has been restricted. Again, there's more detail about that on the website, and again that will likely be finessed as we come towards next week. I realise that there's a huge demand from businesses who feel like their business has been impacted and who are going to be disappointed that they feel they're not eligible for these current funds, or perhaps for what might come next. There is a lot of ongoing discussion, and organisations like FSB will be continuing to push to make sure that we try to get across all the types of business who are being affected, and to make sure we think about what support can be offered to them.
Okay, thanks for that, Susan. Just, I mean, there's also talk of a job support scheme. Have you got any kind of information or detail on that?
So then, just brief, and I'm aware that there's a whole bunch of different support schemes going on in the background. So,
yeah.
For example, there were further announcements to the self-employed income support scheme announced recently by the Chancellor. So you can go and look up detail on that, because there's more tranches of that. Continuing. Just specifically on the job support scheme, so again, there have been a number of changes announced in recent weeks here. So there's now two aspects to the job support scheme. There's the sort of, let's call it the traditional furlough scheme, which comes to a close next week. So now there's been an extension announced from the 1st of November for businesses that are open. And there was originally a tweak to that a few weeks ago, and it was subsequently tweaked again recently. So what that looks like now is the job support scheme. Employees will have to work a minimum of 20% of their normal hours, but the contribution that the employer will make to the non-worked hours is now 5%. It was previously much higher. This scheme is going to run for 6 months from the 1st of November, although it will be reviewed. Bear in mind that there's the job retention bonus, which was previously announced. That will be paid in January to businesses that retain those employees. Employees will be able to cycle on and off this scheme, and they don't have to work the same pattern every month. But the sort of minimum period you would go back on furlough would be 7 consecutive days. So this is what they call job support scheme open. So that's for businesses where there's low demand over the winter, and you can reduce the hours of your employees, but they do have to work 20% of the normal hours. Then there is this new part, which is for closed businesses. So that is for businesses that have been required to close as a result of restrictions across the 4 nations in the UK. So that takes effect from 1st of November, and there's been a lot of media discussion about this, and that will pay 2/3 of normal wages for the businesses, for the employees in businesses that have been required to close. So again, more information on these schemes is available either through findbusinesssupport.gov.uk or on the UK government's website, gov.uk.
Smashing. Thanks, Linda. Susan. Sorry about that. Linda, because I was thinking about you. You've been working with the Scottish Tourism Recovery Task Force. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how that's going to help businesses?
Well, it's not me personally, but Visit Scotland, yes, is one of over 30 representative industry groups, associations, sectors, local government and public sector all coming together, basically to give a series of priority rescue measures and to both the Scottish and the UK government to try and bolster recovery. So they've published a series of recommendations primarily for the Scottish government. They are asking for to work with the sector on planning appropriate evidence-based restrictions and proportionate fair financial compensation for the businesses impacted, particularly if lockdowns are required and particularly on a local level. They're looking for additional targeted grant support to tourism and hospitality businesses who have either not been able to trade at all or sufficiently well enough to generate enough income to see them through the very challenging winter season. They're looking to support and improve workplace safety and skills, looking for a development package to retain talent, really crucial. Job retention will be absolutely, kind of core to all the asks within this package of measures. They're looking to extend the business rates holiday that was introduced during the initial lockdown, and again targeted at the sectors and the regions that are most impacted. They are looking to fund marketing support to boost visitor demand and increase visitor confidence at the right time when it's right to do so. And they're looking to progress alternative options for more robust testing regimes, so to facilitate and drive international travel from those markets where we know that there is that it's safe to do so. They're also looking to support a request to the UK government for temporary removal of APD, air passenger duty, to boost that route competitiveness, and hopefully this can be aligned with the longer term Scottish Government climate change ambitions. Beyond that, for the UK government, they are asking for an enhanced tailored support for tourism and hospitality sectors beyond what's been offered via the job security scheme, beyond furlough, so that there's a specific recognition of the challenges facing this sector. They're looking for a commitment to a permanent VAT reduction for the hospitality sector and an extension to help the broader supply chain beyond March 2021 to really kind of support that recovery, those recovery efforts, and generally a review of taxation measures throughout the whole sector, the whole industry. And a reconsideration of abolishing the duty-free taxation for visitors in the UK to obviously make that that visitor appeal much stronger than it will be without that particular measure.
Yeah.
So quite a comprehensive set of measures. Really, the government has them at the moment. They're looking at them to determine what ones they'll be able to take forward. They'll be looking at this at the same time as the framework that they've set out. All of the business groups and leaders who were involved in the setting out of those measures have also been meeting with government over the past couple of days to review the framework, the 4-tier framework as it's been set out, and to identify what tweaks and what additional measures we would like to see indicated for the sector as well.
Okay, that's really helpful. I mean, Brian talked there about the kind of changes that businesses needed to adopt, really to allow them to return to trading, adhering to social distancing and so on. And I'm aware from the kind of, if we look at particularly the hospitality side of things, you Visit Scotland, you had your good to go system. What's that involve? What kind of information does that, or what kind of things does that help businesses do?
Well, again, good to go is basically a consumer-facing vote of confidence that the business is undertaking the appropriate risk assessments for COVID. So it was the 4 national tourist boards of UK and Northern Ireland got together and created this scheme essentially to help businesses validate that they were following the guidance. So it's looking at the specific reopening guidance and identifying that they carried out appropriate risk assessments alongside it. And that's something that businesses were able to self-identify through a website. And then what we were doing was doing basically a kind of business support call with a large number of the participative businesses to say, how are you getting on? Have you managed to follow that guidance? Have you got any challenges with it? And really support them through that process with my team of sector specialists who look after this for our quality assurance. And similarly for our quality assurance scheme, we've been looking at the criteria for cleanliness within that and identifying, where do we really need to raise our game within that? What was acceptable pre-COVID may not be acceptable post-COVID. So it's an opportunity for us to really kind of raise those indicators and raise that bar to help reinforce with businesses that there is a higher expectation now.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm conscious of time. We're going to move on to some of the questions that we've received. And as I said at the start of this, we've received a number of questions from folk. We may not get to all of them, unfortunately, but we will, following the webinar, try and make sure that an answer or a link to suitable information is sent to everyone. So the first question we've got here is from Angela, who'd like to ask how businesses can apply for funding when 2 aspects of the business fall into separate categories and are open or closed at different times. And Angela's example was she has a soft play facility and a fitness with gym and classes. It's 2/3 soft play, 1/3 fitness. Both are independent, but they use the play to provide childcare so families can access the fitness facilities. And under new Tier 1 guidance, she's asking, can we open both the play and fitness, but with restrictions, so can I apply for the funding? And really, in response to your question there, Angela, we appreciate that people's business activities will often fall into separate categories, and we're feeding that back into the Scottish Government so that guidance can be produced that takes account of this. So we don't have an answer for you at the moment, but as I say, we're feeding the examples of these in, and I think it's kind of key here that guidance, and we touched on this earlier, we need to firm up on that. We need to make sure that guidance is as accurate as we possibly can get it. The experience of the whole kind of small business grant over the summer there has been that things change quite rapidly, and we've talked about that. Brian was saying that whatever he was talking about might have changed by lunchtime, and that's the kind of environment we're in. Things are changing very rapidly, so we're trying to keep the guidance as updated as possible. And information and guidance on the new tiers and business support that will be available is being finalised at the moment. But as it stands, if you're required by law to close down your business activities, you would be eligible for the higher rate. And if your trading is restricted but not required to close, you may be eligible for the hardship fund rate, as Susan was kind of highlighting earlier there. And I think the best guidance at the moment is to contact the local authority, as again Susan was saying, to whom you're making the application for funding before you submit an application, to check with them before you submit. That's the best guidance we can give you on that one. Michaela was saying she runs sewing workshops. Her unit is small, so she's not run any since March, as she can't get the space required. Am I covered under the grant? And we're guessing there, Michaela, you're talking about the current schemes that are, as Susan touched on earlier, live at the moment. And unfortunately, the answer, and I'm being the big badging here, is to say no, unfortunately, you are not covered. So apologies for that. George has asked, so far, we've been unable to receive any funding from COVID business support grants due to not having premises that attract business rates? Can the panel advise any hope that is apparent essential criteria for funding be replaced by alternative confirmation that we should qualify for grants? Susan, do you get any kind of thoughts on that one?
So throughout this crisis, one of the challenges has been, how do we have financial support schemes that can be run by the Scottish Government or local authorities, where we can easily identify who businesses are, what the impact is on them, and give them that support. And the easiest way that's been found to do this is to link grants to the rateable value of premises. Now, since day one, we and others have highlighted that clearly this creates a massive problem for all of the businesses who do not operate from premises. And I think, according to Scottish Government statistics, around half of all the businesses in Scotland are based in homes, so they don't operate out of premises. They might be mobile, they might have staff working remotely, not from a premises. So, and clearly there's an unfairness there for lots of businesses who feel that they have been severely impacted and yet they're not able to access finance and others are. So this is something that we've highlighted throughout. We will continue to highlight it for this current period of restrictions that we're in. We've already heard from a number of supply chain businesses who have been devastated as a result of the closure of hospitality, but who don't have premises. So all we can say at the moment is we are well aware and continue to highlight that this is a problem. Technically and procedurally, it creates more difficulties for the government trying to come up with a scheme where they can't easily verify data about the business, and that's why they've been reluctant to do this. But there are ways. It has been found in the past. There was a tourism and creative fund that was set up, hardship funds set up early in the year to get around this. So it is something we will continue to address. So fingers crossed, and let's just hope we get some good news on that front for businesses that are not able to benefit at the moment.
Okay, thanks for that, Susan. We've got a question here from a local councillor on behalf of a local business. The business runs a local charity that collects and supplies used household furniture for people who are on benefits, low income, or who are homeless. Mike, the question is it advisable for us to stop collecting furniture and other items from households at the minute? This concerns me as I cannot guarantee these items will be safe to pass on. And Brian, I know it's from a local council, that's not why I'm coming to you. You talked about surface cleanliness and cleaning of products. What's your your thoughts on that? Is it safe?
Yeah, obviously there is a definite risk there. And it's something I think I'll feed something back to Scottish Government on this, because I know there's a lot of businesses that actually trade in this way. There's a lot of charities that trade in this way, so I think we have to make sure that it's really clear in the tiered approach and the guidance that supports that. So I would say, just looking at it sensibly, if we're in tier 2, 3 or 4, then I wouldn't do it at all. Tier 1, you probably could, with mitigations put in place, proper risk assessments, etc., and a way of making sure that can be cleaned is cleaned. If it can't be cleaned, then it's put into a kind of quarantine. It's obviously a bit like returns in retail. That kind of making sure that they're left for 72 hours. The science on this is changing all the time, but I think I'll feed that back to Scottish Government. Hugh.
That's a good one. Thanks for that, man. Okay, Elaine has asked, when will we be likely to know what restrictions will be placed on outdoor events taking place in Scotland, bearing in mind that outdoor events in England are currently taking place under local authority guidance and with thousands of visitors and participants? Linda, can I turn to you on that one? What's your kind of thoughts on the event side of things? Do we have guidance on that?
Yeah, well, I totally understand Elaine's concern. The event sector has been really badly impacted by restrictions this year, and it's been a really devastating year for them as a whole. My colleagues at Events Scotland have been looking into this, and they're keeping on top of this guidance. So if you have a look at visitscotland.org/events, and you'll find that there's an extract of the strategic framework that applies specifically to the events sector, and that is looking at what would be permitted from level 0 straight through to level 4. At level 0, outdoor events are permitted, indoor events seated and ambulatory are permitted but with restricted numbers. Level 1, outdoor seated events and open space permitted with restricted numbers. Outdoor group standing events, however, not permitted. And level 2, drive-in events permitted, but all other events not permitted or closed, and stadia closed to spectators. So, and then of course level 3 and 4, we're saying no events permitted at all, and everything closed to spectators. So there is already a kind of outline of the tier levels and proposals for the events sector. And certainly we'll be keeping a close eye on what guidance comes out of government after the debate in Parliament today, to see how that affects specifically that sector, and we'll have that guidance updated and ready for you.
Okay, that's grand. Thanks, Linda. Brian, I wasn't sure if you were waving at me or wanted to make a point. So I'll bring you in.
I think, Susan touched on the issues that we may have with main meal as a definition. I think in this sector, again, we've got a bit of confusion and lack of clarity over a visitor attraction in an event, and we've been pushing Scottish Government to make sure that that definition is really clear. For me, I thought a visitor attraction was a permanent installation. That doesn't seem to be the case. So certainly when the updated guidance comes out, I hope there's far more clarity on that.
Okay, that's really good. And just in the closing moments that we've got, and something that I think might be close to people's hearts, the festive period is usually a vital time for businesses in terms of retail or sales. What do these restrictions mean for the festive period? Really brief answers. Susan, do you think anything we've talked about will be different as part of the festive period approach?
Maybes.
Okay, really short answer. That's brilliant. Linda, what's your thoughts on that?
Yes, it will be. There will be an impact. There's no two ways about it. And I would encourage businesses to think innovatively about how they can potentially monetize through the festive period, by offering things like gift vouchers and gift experiences, home cooking experiences with by video link, anything to help them kind of keep that link alive with the consumers.
Okay, Susan, you've thought of something else?
Sorry, I didn't mean to be flippant. I was trying to characterise what the restrictions might. We don't know yet whether there will be any change around these levels specifically for the festive period. So we honestly can't answer that. I think it's clear that for those businesses who derive a large proportion of income through festive trade, clearly that's not going to happen. Clearly, these restrictions are going to be in place in the lead up to Christmas, and that's going to have a knock-on impact. And I think Linda's absolutely right. I think we've already seen a lot of businesses demonstrate a huge amount of innovation to try and adapt to the new ways that consumers want to buy experiences or services or products. And I think small businesses in Scotland will continue to be great at that over the festive period.
Okay. I'm going to have to draw a line at that because we're rapidly approaching the end of the hour that we have for this session. I'd like to thank our panelists. Has been really good. We've covered an awful lot of ground there. I hope for those of you listening that has been meaningful, that it's been informative. As we said, we will make sure that we follow up on the questions. We'll make sure that links to information are made available. I think it just leaves me to say thank you for joining us. We will keep running these things to give you as much information as we possibly can. But stay safe out there. We wish you all the best with your businesses. Take care, look after yourselves, look after your loved ones. Take care.